The Queen and Rook endgame is one of the first endgames you must master on your chess journey. The rook is under attack, so the queen supports the rook and attacks the king by performing a staircase chase of the king. The king is caught between the lines of the rook and queen, and is forced back with each check, until the king can no longer retreat at the edge of the board, and is forced into checkmate. The king is driven to the edge by forming an attack barrier with the queen and rook. The queen supports the rook to prevent it being taken by the king, while holding the barrier. With each move the king cannot cross the barrier and is driven to the edge of the board. Once the king is on the edge, the king cannot escape the attack barrier and is checkmated. The first step is to use your queen to cut off the movement of the king by creating an attack box around the king. Then bring your own king to the center of the board to push the king towards the edge of the board. Once your king is in the center, use your queen to attack the enemy king and drive it to the edge. Once the enemy king is against the edge, bring your own king closer to support the queen. Then use the queen to attack the enemy king with the support of your own king to deliver checkmate. It is important to always leave a movement square for the enemy king when cutting it off with your queen against the edge. Otherwise you might stalemate the king. You can also stalemate the enemy king if you bring your own king too close and do not first cut off the enemy king's movement using the queen. The first step is to coordinate the rooks to cut off the lines of the king. If the king yields a rank or file, the rook moves in to further cut off his movement. If the king can be safely checked, he is driven towards the edge of the board. The king will try and attack the checking rook, and there are two ways to deal with this threat. The first method is to move your rook along the rank to the furthest edge of the board away from the attacking king. This will maintain the barrier and allow the other rook to continue the attack. If the king attacks the second rook, move it along the rank to the edge of the board in a separate file to the first rook. The rooks can now perform the staircase maneuver and checkmate the king. The second method is to use the rooks to support each other in the attack and wait for the king to move away, before giving an attacking check. This way the king will never be able to take the rook, and the king will be checkmated on the back rank. The first step is to use your rook to cut off the movement of the enemy king by creating an attack box around the king. Then bring your own king to the center of the board to push the king towards the edge of the board. You have to keep your king close to the rook to ensure it is protected. Once your king is in the center, use your rook to keep reducing the size of the attack box. Move your king and rook to attack the enemy king and drive it to the edge. Once the enemy king is against the edge, bring your own king closer to support the rook. The king will block the squares of the enemy king and your rook will attack it on the back rank. If the enemy king will attack your rook if you move it to the back rank, first make a waiting move. The waiting move will drive the back your king barrier, and you will be able to safely checkmate the enemy king. If the enemy king is against the edge of the board, cut it off using your rook with the king supporting it if needed. Then bring your king and knight move away from the enemy king. If the king moves to oppose your king, it will be in the barrier and you can checkmate it. Avoid bringing in your rook too close and block the enemy completely into the corner, it will be stalemate.